you. So hi everyone, I'm Neal Kelso, and again, I'm filling in for Mike Bailiff and David Harrison today. Who unfortunately couldn't make it. I've been working with them for a few years now on the Plants and People of Vanuatu project. First, more explicitly as a linguist, which is what my background is. But recently, we've been doing some very interdisciplinary research about the relationships between plants, people, and daylight, or natural cycles more broadly in the Pacific. So for some background on the project, the Plants and People of Vanuatu started back in 2014 in collaboration with a number of international organizations, as well as local communities and organizations in Vanuatu. So the country of Vanuatu consists of a Y-shaped archipelago of about 80 islands, roughly east of northern Australia near New Caledonia and Fiji. The country as a whole is the most linguistically dense country in the world, with about 130 languages spoken by 300,000 people, or just over 2,000 people per language on average. And our main field site in southern Vanuatu in Tapea province is estimated to be home to half of the country's plant diversity, as well as being home to people speaking at least 8 different languages in the Polynesian and Oceanic. So these facts are important because each separate community in the region holds a unique and detailed set of knowledge regarding the local environment, encoded in the local language, which many people are concerned is fading. Multiple factors contribute to this knowledge loss, from histories of colonialism to shifting economic priorities in younger generations to climate change and habitat loss. And the various priorities of our project are designed primarily to combat this loss. So they include establishing conservation areas to safeguard human and ecological health, comprehensively investigating for the first time the entire flora of the country of Vanuatu, conducting what are called custom schools, which I'll go into a bit more in a second, and producing materials called talking dictionaries, which are online dictionaries that connect linguistic data with local knowledge about the environment. In doing these things, we aren't trying to protect indigenous knowledge by just writing it down in a book and saying, now it's preserved, now it won't disappear. Although things like the talking dictionaries are useful. We are working to promote its continued use and dissemination to younger generations. So the custom schools are a great example of this. They're an entirely local effort, kind of akin to an intensive summer school where kids can go to learn local knowledge and traditions, when often the ways that this knowledge used to be passed on aren't as accessible today. So we talk a lot about environmental knowledge, but what really is that? It can mean a lot of things, including fish, knowledge about fish and fishing. So Ansel and Seru in the top left here sat down with us for the Futuna language talking dictionary. He's a fisherman and he recorded over 200 fish names off the top of his head during our session in one sitting, along with their behavior and how to best catch them. Another category of environmental knowledge is architecture. So the house pictured in the bottom center here is what we call a cyclone house. They're made entirely of plants, but can withstand Pacific cyclones much better than many modern constructions made of concrete and metal siding, which became very clear in 2015 when Cyclone Pan devastated Vanuatu. Many of these newer houses were destroyed while these houses survived. So there's been a great interest. Many people still know how to make these houses, but there's been an interest in spreading this knowledge and reviving it amongst the population more broadly so that it can be protected during these storms. Other environmental knowledge includes medicine, agriculture, foodways, and the topic I'll be focusing on today, which is ecological calendars. So these are time reckoning systems in which natural cycles such as the flowering of plants and the behavior of animals are generally more important for organizing time than lunar calendars, though the moon still often plays a part. Calendars is a bit of a misnomer. So most calendars are divided into blocks of lunar phases, and some of the elements within these calendars are separated into blocks at longer time, but mostly they're just points. So for example, when a certain plant flowers, that means it's time to plant yams. And there are many of these points throughout the year that are all used to organize time. And one good example of this is a phrase I really like, which is used by speakers of the Mele-Fila language, Central Vanuatu, which is the whales bring the planting stick. So people use this to remember that the time when whale migrations pass by the island is also a good time to plant garden crops. But of course, it's not just whales. These ecological calendars are systems in which people read a wide range of cues in their local environment, such as plants, animals, winds, stars, weather, and the ocean, as signs that other local events are now occurring or will soon occur. So this can include natural events like cyclones, or cultural events such as agriculture and rituals. So the garden season, which is very important, isn't just marked by whales, but by a wide variety of these other signals, which are all used together for gardeners to be able to plan their agricultural schedule. Now, this information I'll be presenting comes, of course, from our fieldwork in Vanuatu, but also during the pandemic, we were able to conduct a wide-ranging literature survey of hundreds of works spanning about 150 years of anthropology in the in the Pacific. And we found that there aren't really many studies specifically concerning ecological calendars, but they're bits and pieces kind of hidden throughout different works, such as dictionaries that aren't often very accessible. But from just those bits and pieces, we were able to find that these ecological calendars are a very widespread, robust, and long-standing tradition in the Pacific. So I'll start by giving a few examples from our literature survey, and then I'll talk more about our own. So in a dictionary of the Sikayana language, which is spoken in the Solomon Islands just north of Vanuatu, you can find an entry on a constellation called Manu. And to quote the entry, its position in the sky signals the arrival of strong wind and a time when large coral trout go to lay eggs outside the passage near the island. So just from this entry, you can see how useful and how varied these ecological calendar elements can be. But some other examples come from a dictionary of Chuukese, which is spoken in Micronesia. And this details how the long-tailed cuckoo bird's arrival in May or June corresponds with low tides and good fishing. And in Fiji, the flowering of the coral tree signals a good time to plant yams, while the flowering of Pacific Island silvergrass signals a time of widespread flies, but also widespread conjunctivitis illness. These last two examples are of what we call calendar plants, which I believe our team introduced to the Daylight Academy a few years ago. And that's where I'll start my discussion of Vanuatu. So in the earliest stages of the Plants and People project, people reported using the phenology of plants, so their flowering and fruiting, to organize the schedules of their daily lives. And in the last 2 years, we've been able to go through the data that we collected prior to the pandemic of our plant collections and the uses of those plants, and counted nearly 100 species of plants used for these purposes in southern Vanuatu, which correspond to over 120 local species across multiple languages and cultures. So in Vanuatu, people still use a lot of these plants, and there are roughly two broad categories. So some of the associations between plants and other events are quite direct. So for example, the fruiting of the various species of ficus in the area signals a time when you can hunt fruit bats and birds. So it really only takes a few observations of these animals eating the fruits to know that the next time this tree fruits, if you go there, you'll be pretty likely to find the animals that you want to hunt. But relationships between plant phenology and other events are often a bit more abstract, requiring generations just first to notice the association and then to confirm that it's robust and useful. So for example, when Hedecaria dorstenoides in the bottom left there flowers, people know that sea urchins are, how they say, fat and ready to be harvested. So this association you can't really directly see, but once you have noticed it, it becomes a very useful fact if you like eating sea urchins. Then on a nitrum, the flowering and fruiting of Urina lobata pictured there is a signal that the cyclone season is. And other plants tell people when to plant and harvest crops, announce the time of garden rituals, or inform people when the weather will be getting too hot and that people should work less in the day. So the plant used for this latter purpose is actually also used in northern Vanuatu on the island of Vanuatu to signal the time when the Palolo worms are about to spawn. So Palolo worms are the most cross-cultural example of a single calendar element we found both in our literature survey and in our work in Vanuatu. People from Indonesia in the west to New Guinea to Samoa and Fiji in the east all anxiously await and carefully predict when these worms will arrive each year. So to know when the worms will appear, some of the signals used across the Pacific are the moon, birds, plants, constellations, the weather, fish aggregation, the behavior of reptiles, and even the smell of the sea. Then once the worms arrive, they are used for food and also used in rituals and as medicine. So they're very important in these cultures, and that's why there's so many different calendar elements used to predict. The one ritual associated with them, perhaps you of the DLA will find very interesting. In northern Vanuatu, these worms are used to ritually realign the sun in its path through the sky after the summer solstice. So the extremely regular Palolo swarming is also used as a ecological element itself. So in Papua New Guinea, for example, the worms are used to anchor the lunar calendar to the solar so that all of the other events, such as agriculture throughout the year, aren't thrown. Elsewhere, the worms are used to schedule agricultural activities, predict the arrival of certain fish, and even prepare for natural disasters, since they signal the beginning of cyclone season. Another preliminary angle we're investigating is the use of wind compasses as tools for ecological time reckoning. So in the past, when long distance sailing was still common across the Pacific, this was a tool used for navigation. It was apparently less useful than the main sources of light on the Pacific. So that's the sun during the day and stars at night. But when these lights were obscured by clouds and bad weather, the wind compasses were a tool that used to get people where they were going. In Vanuatu, our colleagues report strong seasonal associations with winds and also tell us that certain winds are said to be signs of certain various natural events. So to Naka language speakers on Tana Island, the north wind brings fog, rain, and cyclones and can appear anytime from August to February. The southwest wind is most common from May to July, and its cool wind tells people that it's a good time to harvest taro. And the northwest and north-northeast winds are both considered good winds and represent times when it's good to fish. Netwar language speakers from the same island, Tana, also use their wind compasses similarly, and also report associations between specific directional winds and specific birds, and use the arrival and behavior of these birds in conjunction with the presence of different directional winds to together reinforce the prediction of various weather events. All of these elements, from plants to animals to winds, make up what we're calling ecological calendars, but there isn't really a formalized or static ecological calendar in any of these places. They're highly adapted to specific geographies, ecosystems, and climates. So even neighboring communities will use very different plants and animals for different purposes. And even within small communities, different people make use of different ecological calendar elements to organize time. So when we were working in Vanuatu, different people, certain experts were able to tell us many of these ecological calendar elements that we reported, but nobody knew all of them. And it always took a community effort to get the whole list of calendar plants that we ended up with. These calendars, and this might be seen kind of as a sign of weakness of these systems, but really it's a strength. So it shows that these calendars are constantly evolving. They've adapted to new plants that have been brought in from outside and use animals such as cats, which are more recent introductions. And they can be adapted to very narrow contexts. So especially in a world where significant changes to the climate and ecosystems of these areas becomes more likely, it's quite useful to have a highly changeable and adaptable calendar system like this. And recent research, such as by Dr. Karim Ali Kassam at Cornell in the United States, suggests that ecological calendars will be very useful tools in the case of climate change. Now, since this panel specifically concerns One Health, I'll talk a bit about that in Vanuatu contexts. So you might have put together that food systems are still often very dependent on these ecological calendars, both in Vanuatu and the Pacific more broadly. The timing of agricultural activities and wild food harvest has been carefully attuned to cycles in the surrounding landscape and seascape. And though climate change does threaten some of these temporal associations, again, the calendars are adjustable. You can find new elements that work better. So for the foreseeable future, people in this region can rely on ecological calendars as tools to maintain productive and nutritive food systems. They also have a bit more of a direct relationship with human health. As I said, they're used to regulate work schedules, and there are signs that yearly cycles of illness are approaching. And calendrical signals are used for disaster prevention. again, as I said, so for example, when the Palolo worm spawns, people know that it's time to build those cyclone houses, which is critical in protecting people's health and lives during these storms. Ecosystem health is another thing that benefits from these systems. So ecological calendars require their users to be closely attuned to the environment at all times, meaning that they're perhaps the first to notice subtle changes in their environment, and from there can work on how to address those changes. So a good example of this concerns lobsters and the sea almond, Terminalia catapa. When this tree's leaves are red and falling, that's traditionally the only time when lobsters are allowed to be harvested on the peninsula. But today, many people many elders say that the lobster populations are falling because people harvest outside of this time frame. And so they propose a revival of this tradition. In this example, that revival could be useful in maintaining both the health of the lobsters, their reef ecosystems, and human since people. And lastly, I want to tie in this work to the theme of this year's conference on how our work can best be applied when working with other people. So an important message that we want to convey with our research is that different people in different parts of the world use daylight and other natural cycles for very different purposes than you or I might be used to. So it's very important to recognize this when thinking about how to address daylight-related issues in other parts of the world. When working with indigenous groups in Vanuatu, or really anyone else, we can't just export our own goals and projects without working with or for the goals of these other people and adapting our work to those contexts. So this is important in our work because the people of Vanuatu clearly have detailed systems, very robust systems in which they use daylight and other natural cycles to address problems in their own lives. So we can't just go in thinking we have the solutions or that we alone can find the solutions. Some of the solutions are already there. And people are adapting them to work out these problems. So we all have a lot to learn, and if we work together with people across the world, we can all help each other explore these important questions of health, nature, and daylight. Thank you.